The good news is there's a lot of information out there. The bad news is there's a lot of information out there. So what you need to do as a consumer of news is be critical. I mean, I don't mean necessarily cynical, but approach things with a critical eye. And that requires effort on the part of the news consumer.
Especially as most of us are getting that news on our phone. And so it's about discerning, is what I'm seeing on TikTok, is this misinformation? Is this real information? So I think especially as social media continues to dominate news cycles, it's important to understand, where that news is coming from and being able to discern, who the source is.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on When Neighbors Talk. I am your host, Dana Tucker Davis, and here is where we come together to discuss news and events that impacts us all and the solutions to the problem. Welcome to the neighborhood. Let's get into it. Today we're talking about access to news and media and information in the digital age. Everyone is used to using their electronic devices to get information all times of the day and night. So we're going to talk about whether or not we have accessibility to that information in the current digital age. So we have some experts with us, neighbors, and we're going to introduce them or let them introduce themselves so that we can get into it. First, we have Julia Boyd. Ms. Boyd, will you introduce yourself to the neighborhood?
Well, thank you for having me today, Dana. I'm Julia Boyd. I'm the executive director for the Atlanta Press Club, where we've been supporting journalists since 1964.
Oh, great. Yay. Atlanta Press Club.
Yeah.
And next we have Donna Carici. I got to get it right?
Carici, good.
All right, great.
Hi, I'm Donna Carici. I'm president of Carici Media, where I am now a media consultant. I'm a former CNN executive producer and college lecturer in journalism.
So welcome to the neighborhood. We're going to discuss our topic. As we have all known, things have changed when how we got news and information. Way back when, you had the news that came on at a certain time and everyone gathered around, and they listened to what was being said. They watched the stories. There were some in-depth exposés and things like that, 60 Minutes. Those shows are still out there, but it's a little different. And so now trying to get this next generation, I'm a mother of a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old. So how they get information is primarily digital. Mm-hmm. And so we want to talk about digital access and what information is out there and available and what are the hindrances to getting information and what solutions we can propose to anyone that's watching in our neighborhood that can make effective change. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Are y'all ready to start this journey?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to give a fact, and it came from the Pew Research Center, and it says, according to the Pew Research Center, a large majority of U.S. adults, and by large majority they mean 86%, say that at least sometimes they get news from a digital device, whether that's their smartphone, their computer, a tablet, their watches, devices. And this includes 57% of those who say they do this solely and often. So is it a challenge to stay aware of current events in the digital era? If everyone is getting their news, or primarily everyone, 86% of adults are getting their news from some digital source?
I don't think it's a challenge. I think when you look at how news is disseminated and how we think about different generations get their news, because I think that's a large part of this conversation, I don't think it's a challenge to get news. It's where's the news coming from? And then how are the individuals processing that news and how do they feel about the news? And I think if you look at different generations, they probably feel differently about their news. Whereas my parents got the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to our house, every day. I do not. I get my news predominantly online with a digital subscription or a free platform that allows me access to either hyperlocal news or national news. So I don't necessarily think it's about looking at challenges. Certainly in some areas it might be when we're talking about digital news. But I think it's more about understanding where you're getting that news, what the source is, and then how you're kind of interpreting that news and going about your daily life.
So I agree with you. And let me add this. I feel like there's a challenge because when, and I'm not going to say how old I am, but I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50. I'll leave it like that. We trusted the print news. We trusted the radio news. We trusted the television news. And so I think one of the challenges is the trust level has changed over the years. My children, for example, and their friends, they don't trust the news. They don't trust the sources. Now, I don't know if that's because if they click on something that looks like a reputable outlet, it actually isn't. You know, there are some companies that make spoof news, right? They don't necessarily know that those are spoofs and not really the news. And then they read it, and then it turns out to not be true. Then that creates a level of distrust, and I feel like there is some distrust from certain generations of the news. I mean, we've seen that particularly in the last 6 to 8 years with elections and everything. The trust level of the reporting, regardless of where the source is in the pits, right?
Right.
And so that's a challenge. And then I'm an attorney, and so I know that there are challenges with access, because all of us can pull our phones out. We can, decide to get the news. We can subscribe to get the news. But then there are lots of pockets because people look at Georgia as being Atlanta and Peaches. So, but there's so much in between. There are lots of areas where the connection is slower, the bandwidth is smaller. All of the kids in school, they're getting their news. So there are challenges that are out there, and I think that we have to figure out how to get the accurate news to people.
I think you nailed it. And the good news is there's a lot of information out there. The bad news is there's a lot of information out there. So what you need to do as a consumer of news is be critical. I mean, I don't mean necessarily cynical, but approach things with a critical eye. And that requires effort on the part of the news consumer. And I think I noticed this when I taught on a college level. You're absolutely right. The students today, the young people today, consume news so differently as we're talking about digitally versus, the print. And certainly digitally is across the board the way most people are consuming news, as you cited. But I think that we're going to have to figure out a way to empower our young people to have that critical eye.
Well, so I agree with you. But how do you make sure they have a critical eye when the source of the news might be limited to 140 characters? Yeah. That's going to limit my ability to give enough information, I think. And the other part of that is a lot of the news, I felt like news was pretty much free. My parents paid for the AJC to come at 25 cents or $1. It got up to $1 to be delivered. And so we had that access. You had that paper to do whatever you wanted to do with it. When you finish reading it, read it again. But now I feel like cost is associated with it because subscriptions.
Yeah.
Online subscriptions. You get in breaking news and you go click on it and then you read a little bit and it says pop up. It says you have to pay $1 for a subscription. You have maxed out on your free views or news.
Enter in your email address.
Yes. Enter your email address,
of course. Subscribe.
And subscribe, and then you have the sources that are free but are less credible.
Right.
Right. So I think that's an issue. And then not that the news needs a devil's advocate, but they have to get what's going to be a click.
Yes.
To get someone to it. So how do you address that?
Well, I mean, I think what Donna was saying was such a good point about the onus kind of now being more on the consumer of the news, whereas, generations ago, we had one news source, three news sources, a daily paper, and then a few outlets that were reporting on your local or state news. But now, of course, we're saturated. And so as a consumer, I think that we have to teach from a young level, and that can be in schooling, at home, or maybe digitally, of where you're getting your news. Maybe X, in 140 characters or less, you might have to go to a different source or understand that, that might be one piece of the news that you're consuming that day. And then also in terms of, being able to access the news, is looking for other platforms that might be free, some hyperlocal, opportunities, some nonprofit newsrooms that, it's an option to donate, but they do allow access to their platforms. And so while it might be a little bit more work on the person, I think we're all used to now, making choices, and every day we're making, so many different choices. It's putting in a little bit of that legwork to find the credible news sources that you feel comfortable with, that you feel you can relate to, and that you trust the journalists that are reporting on that news. And so maybe putting in a little bit of work to find a few that, you feel like are reporting on news items that are worthy and that you feel, are credible.
So not only do we have informal reporters who have no training and they don't care about credibility, they just trying to get a viral moment to get some clicks and views and maybe a check from one of the social media companies or platforms, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then you have the volume, sorting through the volume. So if everything is instant, then it sounds like you guys are saying, well, the consumer has a responsibility to go in and sort it out. But if I know I can go over here and get it for free, faster, and not have to sort it out versus going through all these, okay, let me figure out which one is right and which one is wrong, and which one is credible, which one is not as accurate. When I can just, I'm gonna click follow for free, and whenever they post, I'm gonna get it. So that's a challenge. And how do we deal with that?
Well, I mean, one thing to think about is the inventory that the journalist has is credibility, right? So if you're not credible, you're going to lose followers eventually. It may take a while, and you'll get your 15 minutes of fame for that shot of somebody tripping at the Met Gala, right? But by and large, you're going to lose out in the long run. So if you want to be in the business of providing credible information, you have to be credible. We've all seen instances of journalists and across the board, nationally, globally, who have said or done something that has damaged their credibility, and it hurts in the long run. So yeah, I mean, we did talk about the onus being on the news consumer. It's also on the journalist, and it's on the people who call themselves journalists. And you're right, everybody with a camera right now, with a phone, with a blog, is a journalist, right? So they will eventually lose followers if they continue to fabricate, and people will come to realize that this is kind of a fantasy. Like, reality TV is not truly reality. I mean, it is somewhat scripted.
The business side of the news is pushing a lot of this information that's not necessarily factual, that's embellished some, because you want to have the headline. You get the headline dupes you in. Then the article itself may have all the facts in it, but that headline is what's going to get you that click, and that headline is what's going to that's going to stick in your mind.
Well, and unfortunately, another challenge to go along with everything that you've just been saying is the rise in AI and technology, and coming out with news that truly is fake. And so that's another issue that we're going to be facing moving forward. And in terms of when we talk about media literacy and understanding misinformation and being a discerning consumer, AI is going to certainly be relevant, already is relevant. And newsrooms and journalists and photojournalists, we're all kind of tackling this issue, but it's going to continue to serve as a challenge, I think, on both sides, the consumer side, and then, of course, the news and journalism side. And so while it can be a great tool for use, in many different things, that's certainly going to be another challenge as we kind of move forward in educating our, the future generations in terms of news consumption, and then also, utilizing it to make things possibly more efficient in the future.
When you started talking about AI, two stories came to mind. One story is, and it was a couple of weeks ago, it was a viral video of bunnies hopping
on the
trampoline.
I saw it.
Now, I saw it the first time, and I said, oh my God, look at the cute little bunny. She's jumping.
I did the same.
And then it wasn't until 3 days later, I was talking about it to my 18-year-old, and she says, Mom, you so gullible. That was AI. I was like, no, it wasn't. Yes, it was. Their feet weren't even moving. And I said, what? I looked at it again. And she said, some of them are cut off. And then I realized that it was AI. And I had been duped. And I think that I am quite the discerner of the fake news.
Of course.
And then the other thing that popped in my head is, as an attorney, there are laws and rules from judges that say you can't, when you use AI, because people being lazy, like you said, not ferreting out information, lawyers were typing in their cues into the AI bots or whatever, and getting entire briefs, entire motions or whatever, with made-up law, made-up citations, and they didn't know it because they didn't check it, so they were sending it in. And now we have all these cases across the United States where judges and appellate courts are saying you cannot use AI in that way. Now, that doesn't mean that the companies that do legal research aren't marketing an AI version. They are. They're saying use this because it'll be credible. But again, you have to have some responsibility in ferreting the information you get. So when I thought about AI, the first thing I said was, I can't tell bunnies on a trampoline from reality, then what did that mean about
We're
me?
in trouble.
You know, and so and that leads me to what's real and what isn't real, you know.
There are some really good hyper-local sites, as Julia was mentioning, where they're actually about the community online, and they're fed by people who submit the information. So, you know, the everyday person becomes a journalist in a way. And a lot of those are things that are very, you know, kind of current events, but events that are happening in the community so the community can come out and be together. It does break my heart to see newspapers slowly dying because most of the investigative journalism in this country is done by newspapers.
Yeah.
AJC is incredible at this. And, you know, thank God for the AJC, but not everyone lives in a community where they have that resource. So you're absolutely right. It's a scary thing. I think the thing that small communities need to do is figure out a way to come together. And if they don't have some sort of hyper-local resource, create one.
So,
Well, I was just going to add to that. You know, as we're talking about digital access and the challenges, you know, surrounding news consumption, there are news deserts out there, and certainly in Georgia when we're talking about some of the rural areas. And so I think it's really important that as Georgians as a state, not just Metro Atlantans, you know, as we sometimes tend to view, that we're looking at our news sources and looking at some of those, you know, smaller town newspapers, because when they do close, there is no town news. They have to go out and either look at, you know, broader areas or they're not getting that town-centric news. We've seen a couple really positive programs. Some have been university funded, where students are actually going into the communities and providing that resource to the town. And it's a great way for them to hone their skills as future journalists, but also it's, you know, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's creating town news and it's giving opportunities to young journalists.
well, that's great.
I also think on the flip side of the AI coin, there's opportunity there for, you know, us to utilize technology to be able to somehow service these small town news deserts. So, you know, I think it's something to keep our eye on for certain, because, you know, news is important in any location.
So news desert. Now, I've always heard of a food desert, but I hadn't really thought about it in terms of news. There are spaces and areas where it feels like a desert when it comes to news. And I also think that rolls into a misunderstanding. What is media literacy, and how would it help, or could it help, or does it help the information and the consumers?
Media literacy is basically the ability to analyze and define information that you receive via the media. And there's all kinds. There's, you know, information literacy, there's media literacy, there's financial literacy. The media literacy that we're talking about really deals with, again, the consumer's ability to analyze that news, pull it apart and say, you know, who's giving me this message and why? Is there a motivation here? You know, what evidence are they giving me? And is it logical? Does it make sense? These are all things that are very important. And I think you can start at a very young age. You can start with elementary school students and a poster. and say, what's this poster about? Who is giving you this message? And what do they want you to do? And do you think it's okay? That's the kind of very simple thing. And I think if you approach it with kids as we're going to be information detectives, and just kind of plant that seed early, I think we'll do a better job coming up maybe. We'll see, but I'm a crusader for media literacy, and I think you have to start young.
Okay.
And it's certainly something that we work on, too, at the Atlanta Press Club. Media literacy is one of our ongoing initiatives. We actually created a booklet with Georgia Humanities and the University of Georgia Journalism School a few years ago it's called Democracy and the Informed Citizen. So it's a great tool to be able to understand what media literacy is, understand the role that journalists play in our democracy, and whether it's locally or nationally. And so that's certainly a resource. But, I agree. I think that, starting young is really important as we're talking about educating future generations on the importance of media literacy and the importance of freedom of the press and the role that journalists play. And that's a job opportunity also that you can grow up one day to become a journalist. And so that's certainly, resources that we continue to try to provide here in Atlanta, and also just online with access and different programming. But really, I think starting at a young age can help us, especially as most of us are getting that news on our phone. And so it's about discerning, is what I'm seeing on TikTok, is this misinformation? Is this real information? So I think especially as social media continues to dominate news cycles, it's important to understand, where that news is coming from and being able to discern, who the source is. For anyone that might be listening, the Atlanta Press Club has a request a speaker button on our website, and you can request a speaker from the club that will come in and talk about media literacy to a group, any age. It doesn't have to be school age. We come out in the community and do library events or chamber events anytime, and can bring working journalists to talk to any individual who's interested in learning about media literacy.
Well, good. And thank you guys for coming. So while you're saying that, we're going to segue into how can our neighbors and the community reach you guys or your agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is atlantapressclub.org. All information and resources, including events and memberships and request a speaker and media literacy initiatives, can be found on there. And also you can email us at info@atlpressclub.org, and we would be happy to chat.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Now, can you tell us how to reach you?
Yes, you can reach me via LinkedIn. Donna Krache, Krache is my last name. My company is Krache Media. That's one word, Krache, media.com. Or you can just email us at krachemedia@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Now, I need to talk to you because I think earlier on I read your bio, it says she does media press and, helping you with your persona. I need that. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Today we had a good conversation around the digital era, and so I want to thank you for your knowledge and sharing it with not only me but the neighborhood. And we look forward to seeing you back. Maybe we'll come back in a year or so and say, hey, have things changed, and see where we are. So we again thank you for coming out, and I want to thank our neighbors for visiting with us today and engaging in our conversation, because we know when neighbors talk, locals listen. And I am Dana Tucker Davis, your host, and I hope to see you next time.